Good evening, everybody. Oh, come on. I thought we just woke you up. Good evening, everybody. There we go. I got to make sure we start awake at the very least. Thank you for being here again. Thank you to Pastor Brian for putting this together. If you haven't met me yet, my name is Pastor James Mello. My background is both in ministry and in social work, which is also ministry, I believe. And so I've been asked to come here and sort of talk about trauma, anxiety, depression, and that's what we're going to do. We started last night, and I introduced some of the concepts of what might be happening in our brain or how our experiences can impact our mental health and also our physical health. And so tonight we're going to do something pretty similar, but we're also going to hear from somebody who's going to share a little bit of her story as well. Before we get started with everything, I think I had two notes I wanted to remind everybody of. The first is just to, so I know that Pastor Brian had talked last night about maybe anybody who wanted to meet with me a little bit more, maybe talk in a deeper way on something that might be going on with you or a friend. I know there were a few people who signed up for that. I haven't forgot about you, and I'll be in touch either, probably not tonight, but sometime tomorrow so we can set up a time to just get to know each other and maybe address whatever's going on. So thank you for your patience with that. And on that note as well, I just wanted to remind you that we are talking about heavy things. And so we're going to address some heavy things again today. So I want you to be aware of that, be prepared for that. And also, like I said yesterday, if it's overwhelming to you, that's totally understandable. This can stir up all kinds of emotions. And so if there's something that just gets a little bit too heavy, a little bit too overwhelming for you, feel free to take a break, take a breather, head outside if you need to, and then when you're ready, you can come back in. And like I said yesterday, I really appreciated this at the end. I want this to be a conversation. I think that's often where the most valuable time happens, is when I'm addressing kind of some comments and some questions that you may have. And so throughout this time tonight, we're going to have microphones roving in the audience again. We got one over there. Do we have another one, or are we just sticking with one? We do have two. Okay, so we'll get to you. Raise your hand. If I don't see you, again, wave your hand, because I have to squint like this oftentimes to be able to see people. But I really want to encourage you to feel free to ask or to follow up with some of the things we're discussing today. We're going to get to the conversation. I don't know if you wanted to pull up the exact slide that we were on last night. That's where we're going to take it from. Just wanted to remind you of the concept of adverse childhood experiences. We went through that test last night. If you weren't here, you can look it up online. And essentially what that test has established, it's a very basic yes or no test, but it reminds us that what has happened to us in childhood oftentimes will have lingering impacts for the rest of our life. It's not a life sentence. It doesn't mean that we cannot heal and recover. In fact, I had someone come up to me last night who said they had a perfect score, 10 out of 10, which is maybe not the test you want a perfect score on, but what was incredible is this person is very well-adjusted person, at least as far as I know. And they have a healthy family. And so that's a really encouraging thing, right? That just because you've had a lot of things happen to you that were outside of your control does not mean that you have to be stuck in that. There's all kinds of hope. We're going to talk especially tomorrow about what that might look like. What are some things that we can do to help ourselves or to help other people? Tonight I wanted to help you understand a little bit more about stress and what stress does to our brain. So we're going to start with this slide right here that talks about the degrees of stress. So you can see there's 3 degrees that they talk about here. Different people will say it differently. But I like to compare it kind of to lifting weights, which is something that I don't enjoy doing, obviously. I'm kind of scrawny. But lifting weights is a good analogy for me because I think about it. Whenever you're lifting weights, you're putting stress on your muscles, right? And if you don't lift weights at all, you're putting no stress on your muscles. Now, that's not a horrible thing, but it means that your muscles won't grow, right? In the same way, we do need some stress in our lives in order to grow. We do best under a little bit of stress. That's why we have to have deadlines sometimes. That's why some of us, like me, we often procrastinate until we have to get it done. And that extra level of stress can bring some focus in our lives. So just like that, there are positive levels of stress. Everybody has stress in their lives, and you need to have some of that in order to really do well. And so positive stress will give you a brief increase in your heart rate. It's going to give you a little bit more focus. It's going to elevate the stress hormone. We're going to talk about that a lot. The stress hormone is called cortisol. And cortisol is really, really important for survival. It's something that God gave us in order to help us survive stressful situations. And so we want some cortisol in some situations. We just don't want it all the time. Okay, tolerable stress. This is where you start lifting a weight that maybe is a little bit too heavy for you, but you can manage it in short amounts of time. So you do a few reps. It might be a little bit too much for you. It might be a little overwhelming. You're not quite there yet. But it's not going to do damage to your system. That's what tolerable stress is. So this is serious stress, but it's temporary. So maybe you are, finishing up a degree, or you're finishing up high school, or maybe, further on in your career, you have this big project that you're working towards, and it's really stressful. Maybe you have some relational stress that happens at the same time. You and the person you're in a relationship with, you're not getting along very well. Something's going on with your family. And so for a couple months, things are just harder than usual. It's not ideal. It's not good for us to have that much stress, that much on our plate. But it can be manageable, right? And so it doesn't have long-term effects most of the time. So these things can be mitigated, meaning they can be lessened by positive influences or relationships. In other words, if I just did a double master's degree, which is insane now that I think about it. But I did it, and during that time, it was a really, really challenging time for my family. I'm married, we have 3 children, and so, it was a crazy time for us. But we were in a community that was just filled with other young families, and I was with the social work department in the seminary with some really wonderful professors who were very understanding people. And as stressful and as challenging as it was, there were all of these relationships and all of these mitigating factors that helped me to manage that stress in a pretty healthy way, I think. And so that's tolerable stress. What we are focusing on a lot right now is this last one, toxic stress. So using that weightlifting analogy, this is when you lift something that is just way too heavy for you. What happens if you lift something that's way too heavy? What's probably going to happen to you? You're going to get injured, right? You're going to hurt yourself. And that injury could take a really long time to heal. It was just too much. It overwhelmed your ability. And so, just like the weightlifting analogy, different people can lift different weights. Are you with me? So some people, because of their personality, because of their background, their history, they can handle some pretty heavy weights and come through on the other side and still be okay. It's still tolerable for them. Other people, maybe because they've already had a lot of stress in their lives, or maybe because their personality, they're just not as resilient people, and that's perfectly fine. They can get overwhelmed with a little bit lighter weight. A little bit less stress in their life can still overwhelm their system. Of course, age and experience, everything plays a role. But it becomes toxic when it is intense stress and you have a prolonged activation of your stress response. We're going to talk about that stress response, like what's happening in our body. When it happens for a long time, or if you don't have enough relationships and a community around you that's really helping you, you start feeling really isolated, really alone, or maybe even in depression, a lot of times we isolate ourselves. We cut people out who might actually help us, right? When that happens, the stress becomes toxic. So when we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder and these sorts of things, what we're talking about is the stress overwhelmed our system for long enough that it's really changed the way that we're approaching life. We're not handling life in the same way that we did before. And that's oftentimes when we might need some help, some extra people around us, and maybe even a professional to help us with that a little bit as well. Okay, that's going to start immediately. So I wanted to, we're going to talk about resilience tomorrow. We're going to talk about what can we do. But I wanted to introduce a concept right now. So in just a moment, I'm going to switch the slide, and we're going to have this video play. It's just a minute and a half, and it's a peaceful video. Okay, so what I want for you to do, either close your eyes or you can look at the screen if you want to. But I want you to just take this moment and just breathe and listen and experience, okay? And maybe you can see if God speaks to you in this moment. But I want you to take this minute and a half and just really soak it in. Try to avoid any other distractions or whatever, okay? And then we're going to talk about it afterwards. Ready? How was that? Pretty restful? So I really enjoy doing this because I get to fool the audience, right? But what I also enjoy is seeing the change that happens. Now, someone, maybe raise your hand, tell me what happened to you during that time. When the music changed, raise your hand so we can get a microphone. Tell me what happened to you internally or whatever. I see a few hands here. Oh, we got to have the red microphone, if we can have that turned on. Just yell it out in the meantime.
When I got my captivity, the person went to a really dark place. That's what I got.
Okay. Person went to a really dark place. Okay, I see some other hands over here, Chris, and then we'll go along this edge here. You felt agitated. Okay. There, we got the mic. Okay, so when the music changed for you, because you didn't feel agitated at the beginning. Okay, you felt agitated when the music changed.
I felt my heart rate change instantly, and my shoulders started creeping up, and I kind of want to look around me and see what's about to happen.
Great description, because you're describing the internal changes in our body, right? So your heart rate changed, your muscles clenched, right? Especially in your shoulders, and now you're actually looking for somebody, all right?
For me, I actually was skeptical at the first bit of it. I thought something was going to happen, and I was like, oh no, this is actually kind of nice. And then the change happened, and I jumped, and my heart rate sped up, and I was like, okay, what's actually about to happen?
Okay. So what you guys have described, did anyone else want to share? I want to give a chance. Oh, go ahead.
Actually, I woke up and I was starting to fall asleep.
So the peacefulness is, man, if you're falling asleep in less than a minute, you need some rest, bro. You need some rest. But yeah, that woke you up. Okay, what you have described is a stress response, okay? Now, why did you have the stress response when the music changed? Why was the music stressful to you? Nobody told you the music was stressful. Why was that so overwhelming to you? I'm hearing people say something. Just yell it out.
It was sudden.
Okay, there was a sudden change. There's an eeriness to it. Part of it is because when we hear that music most of the time, what usually is happening? Where might you hear that music otherwise? Scary movies. So this is what we would call painful past learning. What that means is, when you hear this music, it reminds you of another time in the past, and when you heard that music in the past, it was a scary time, right? It was a scary movie in this example. So, how many of you were able to stay relaxed and stay focused on your piece when the music changed? Anybody? We got one person. That's impressive. Very impressive. You might want to teach us how you did that. For the majority of us, when the music changed, it changed us, right? It changed our ability to focus. Now, nothing externally in the room changed at all, but internally, our heart rate changed. Some of us might have had some sweaty palms or something. We're looking around because now we're in a stress response. Now, I want to tell you that some people, when they're in that place of toxic stress, when their system has been overwhelmed by whatever's been going on in their lives, their internal music has changed. Are you with me? Meaning that we could all be sitting in this audience right next to each other, and for you, you're experiencing that peaceful moment. You're in a place where you don't have a lot of stress going on internally. But the person right next to you might have been going through so much in their lives that their internal music is kind of like that scary music. And how easy do you think it is, how simple do you think it is for them to focus and for them to listen to a pastor? Or maybe if they're in school, how easy do you think it is for them to listen to a teacher? Or maybe when you're at work, how easy is it for them to listen to their boss when their internal music is so overwhelming? That's what a stress response does. Now, there's a really wonderful time for stress response, and then there's other times when it's not so good. Okay, so I believe firmly that God gave us this stress response. So a stress response, basically what happens is you have something scary happen. In this case, it was the music. Then you have, they talk about resistance. You have some sort of response to it. Okay, you're trying to figure out what to do about it. Afterwards, you tend to be a little exhausted. Now, this was a very short example, so you probably won't be that exhausted unless you were before, right? But if this was ongoing, what you would find is later on after the threat, you get pretty tired. Let me give you an example of this, okay? Say you're driving down the road, those of you who can legally drive. Say you're driving down the road, you're heading home after this, you know, you hit the interstate and you're going 70, 75 miles an hour. It's just after dusk. And out of the corner of your eye, a deer starts popping out towards the road right in front of you. Now, in that moment, are you thinking, I wonder if that's a buck or a doe? Right? Are you wondering, I wonder how many points is on that rack? Like, you're not thinking about these things, right? Even if you're, now, I said this one time and this guy's like, yeah, that's exactly what I'd be thinking. Well, he's clearly a hunter, but most of us are not in that space. What are we thinking about when we see that out of the corner of our eye? Right. Is it going to run out in front of our car? In fact, in that moment, in that instant, you're probably not thinking really at all. Because what happens is you go into a stress response. There's a stressor. A deer is about to hit my car, or I'm about to hit the deer, right? In that moment, you don't have the time to sit there and process the best thing. So what God has done is he's given us a stress response where we shut that part of our brain off, the logical part of our brain, and we go to reaction mode, which is much faster, right? So our reaction is basically, we call it fight, flight, freeze, and there's two others, there's fawn and flock. We'll talk about that in a moment. But in that moment, your job is simply to figure out how best to survive. So do you swerve? Do you hit the brakes? Do you hit the gas? Do you go straight ahead? What is the best response? She said, yes, all of those. I want to do all of it, right? I don't care what it takes, right? So we're in that moment. We're not actually thinking. We're going maybe based on past training, past experience, and we're going based on whatever our body does in that moment. You're in a stress response. Now, somehow you manage to get around the deer. About a mile down the road, you pull over to the side of the road and you're starting to think again, right? You're starting to think about, wow, that could have been really bad. I'm so happy and so grateful that nothing bad happened. What happens to your body in that moment usually? You relax, you start shaking, right? A lot of times people will start shaking. Maybe they'll have the sweaty palms or somewhere else. Because they're coming back into their relaxed state in their body. So this is what God has done in order to allow us to survive bad situations. We think way too slowly to survive a bad situation if we're sitting there thinking through every single thing. We've got to react, right? Now that's really good in short moments. But the problem is, what happens when we have the same stress response over and over? So like imagine again, there's a grizzly bear or whatever. You're out hiking on the trail, you see this bear. In that moment, now I know we're trained like if it's a certain type of bear you're supposed to fight, a certain type of bear you're supposed to freeze, another one you're supposed to run. In that moment, do you think you're going to be thinking through all of those things? Most people will not. A few select people will. Most people will just go into their stress response, whatever it is. So some are going to try to pop that bear in the face. Some are going to play dead. Some people are going to run away, right? And it's not a conscious decision at that point. They're just doing whatever their body has learned to do in order to survive a threat. Now, imagine that grizzly bear, okay, and that stress response, you have that bad situation that's happening. But imagine if it was a grizzly bear that lived in your home, okay? Now we're not talking about grizzlies anymore. Imagine every time you come home to some threat, right? Somebody who might hurt you if they're angry, or if they drink, something might happen. And so the stress response keeps happening over and over. Or imagine you grow up in a neighborhood where anytime you walk down the street, you don't know. You got to be keeping an eye out for threats all the time because you don't know who's around and what might be going on. Imagine you live in an environment, you go to a church that is extremely painful, right? They're kind of extremely judgmental about anything, maybe an issue that you're dealing with, right? So every time you end up going there, it's activating your stress response. Well, what is good in a short term can be really, really negative in a long term, right? Because then you're in survival mode all of the time. And that's where it becomes traumatic stress, toxic stress. So see this picture right here. It's the same actual situation, right? You're going out for a walk. You see people out for a walk. But based on what's going on internally, based on your past experience, if you grew up, or if you're in a place where you truly see people as generally good people, generally kind, and you're feeling pretty good about life, you might see everybody happy, everyone's smiling, everyone's a potential friend. However, if you've been in a stress response for a long time, you're in survival mode, everyone's not a potential friend. You're going to look at the same people and see them as potential threats sometimes. Everyone's sort of looking at you. Everyone's, wondering about you or talking about you behind your back. Nothing about the external environment has changed. What's changed is our own experience. Are you with me? Yes or no? Is this making sense? Okay, so this is really important. So cortisol is that stress response. You get a little bit of cortisol and all of a sudden you're in fight, flight, freeze. You're doing whatever you need to do to survive. It's a very good thing in short term. But if it keeps pooling on your brain, it changes the way you live life. So it'll change the way you are able to pay attention. It changes your impulse control. This means like your ability to think before you act. People who have been in survival mode their whole life, they're very impulsive oftentimes because they just had to be in those moments. So that's what they learned in order to survive. It changes your sleep. It changes your ability to manage your emotions. It can actually impact the ability of your frontal cortex of your brain to fully develop. That's your thinking part of your brain. So the more that you're in a stress response, the more challenging it can be for you to be able to manage life in a really healthy way. So these are brain scans. The one on the left is a brain scan of a person who lived a generally healthy life. They grew up in a family, in an environment, a community that was pretty, good for their development. And you see all the color is brain activity, right? So those are all the places where thinking is taking place. Now you see the one on the right. This is the brain of a young person who unfortunately had experienced quite a bit of abuse. So they were in survival mode a lot. So their stress response was happening. So that cortisol was pooling on different parts of their brain. You see how there's literal dark areas of their brain compared to the other person because that cortisol pooled on it and it made it a lot more challenging for the brain development to take place. Now imagine you have these two students sitting right next to each other in class. Do you think they're going to behave the same way? No, they're not. One of them is likely going to be, pretty focused in school. They're going to be able to pay attention and follow instructions. The other one, what do you think might happen with them? You can yell it out. What's that? Behavioral issues. I heard someone say something back there. I couldn't quite pick it up. Sleeping, okay. Distracted. These are a lot of your kids who get diagnosed with ADHD. These are your kids who have a hard time sitting still, right? They're not trying to be bad most of the time. They're just overwhelmed. There's just too much. They've been in survival mode too often, and so that's just sort of what happens. Now, this can take place for anybody. This is reversible. That's the beautiful thing about it. So this is just to help you to understand maybe why some people struggle where other people don't. And if you don't struggle, this maybe can help you to understand why some of your friends or your family members do. Because they've been through some things that have changed the way their brain is impacted. But, like I said, this is changeable. We're going to talk more about what that would look like later. Here's one way we explain it, okay? Let me see how much time we've got, because I get to talking and get too excited. Okay, I want you to understand this with me. And so take your hand, okay? And first, I'm going to explain in very general terms. I am not a neuroscientist or anything like that. But this is in very general terms. This is a hand model of the brain. This is really helpful even for teaching kids. So your thumb, put your thumb in here. Okay, this is what we would call like the lizard brain. That's what people call it, right? This is the part that just keeps the lights on. You have no control over this part of your brain. This is what develops first as a baby in the womb. And it is it's the one that keeps your heart rate going. It's the one that keeps you, reminding you to breathe. Whether or not you think about it, it's always keeping everything on. So that part develops first. After that, you have this second part right here. Okay, this is the limbic system. The limbic system is the seat of all your emotions. Okay, so that develops second. So this is where fear, anger, happiness, love, all of those emotions are felt right here in your limbic system. After that, you can wrap your hand around. After birth, this continues to develop. This is your prefrontal cortex. This is the front part of your brain. This is your thinking brain. This is what sets you apart from all the other animals, right? Because God created us with a thinking brain that is far more developed. It gives us a sense of self, a sense of understanding of right and wrong in a different way, and all of these other things. So this is the part that keeps us on the right path and making good decisions as long as we're really actually using it. So here's a couple things about that. Number one, this develops over a long period of time. In fact, for men, do you know when it stops developing, the prefrontal cortex? What's that? 25? Someone said 30? The science is showing sometime after 30 years old is in men when it finally stops developing. Okay? So some people are like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I see that. Now for women, it finishes developing quite a bit sooner, right? I think sometime in the 20s. And so there's this gap of time where men and women typically, as a general rule, are maybe not fully in the same lane when it comes to logical development, right? And so here's the thing about it though. Imagine this is you when you're not stressed, when everything's okay. But say that you have an experience like the deer jumping out in front of you. What happens is you flip your lid. What happens is your logical brain goes offline and your emotional brain, which moves much faster, takes over. This is a good thing in that moment, right? Because you need to go fast in order to survive. But say you've been through a lot of stress in your life. And then you have a bad day. You wake up late. You have all of these different things take place in your life. So you stub your toe. You forget. You wear your shirt inside out when you get to work. You finally realize it, and you spill some ketchup on it, whatever. All of a sudden, you're kind of frustrated. You might be about here, right? Then you get home, and you've been stressed all day, and someone at home says, like, why didn't you do the dishes? Boom, you're up here. You flipped your lid. When you're in this place, rational conversation does not take place anymore, right? And so what happens is you become very reactive. You're reacting to all the stress because you're in fight, flight, freeze. So some people are going to avoid conversation altogether. I don't want to hear this. Leave me alone, right? Other people, they're fighters. So they're chasing them down. Let's talk about this. We need to talk about this. Next thing you know, the other person has flipped their lid. So now you got two people trying to have conversation with each other. Is anything reasonable going to take place during this time? Absolutely not, right? So what we need to do oftentimes is we need to recognize when we're up here, and then we need to have the skills to be able to bring ourselves back down, bring our logical part of the brain back online. Also, this is why, in high school, you might have high schoolers who do really impulsive things, right? Just really kind of boneheaded things. And you might ask them, why did you do that? And they'll be like, I have no idea. Right? They actually cannot answer. And we often think that they're lying about it, but the reality is they probably have no idea why they did it because their prefrontal cortex hasn't even fully developed, and they were probably acting out of the limbic system anyway, acting out of emotion. So that's why a lot of the impulsive decisions that we make that we regret later, why we make those decisions, because we aren't in a place where we're actually thinking fully. So this can be really good shared language in a family, like with your kids and with your spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. You can ask people, hey, where are you at right now? And if they say, I'm up here, this is not the time to have conversation. We're going to save conversation for later. Same with your kids. If they're up here and you're trying to discipline them, they're not going to understand in that moment the full impact of the discipline. They may not even really learn from it. We have to get them back down here. We have to teach them how to manage their emotions, get back to their rational brain. Then we can have the discipline. Then we can have the conversations that need to be had, right? The consequences. But when you're trying to parent somebody and they're already up here, it's not going to work the way that we think it's going to work most of the time. So that's one way of understanding it. Here's another way of understanding it. Let's just do this real briefly. Scale of 1 to 10 right now, just hold up how many fingers. How stressed do you feel? 10 is like the most stress you could possibly feel. 0 is no stress at all. Just hold up your hands. Where are you at? Like, I'm going to put up about a 4 right now. So again, 0 to 10, where are you at? This is just a really useful tool for you to be aware of kind of where you're at and where other people are at. You can put your hands down. But what we found is there's kind of like a window of tolerance. This is like when you can manage the stress that's happening in your life. And typically speaking, if you're between the scale of like 2 to 7, 2 to 6 or 7, you're within the zone where you might be stressed, you might be having a little bit going on in your life, but you can manage it. You're in a place where it's okay for you. Notice how it's subjective, right? It's based on me. It's based on how I'm actually feeling. Now, if you're above 7, if you're at 8 to 10, you're probably at a place where you're not in a rational space anymore. You're overwhelmed, so you're moving from a place of survival. So anytime you're getting up to 8 to 10, if you realize that, that's a reminder, oh, I might need to get myself back down. I got to find a way to manage my stress. Either I've got to take something off my plate, or if I cannot take anything off my plate, I have to find a way to manage all the stress that I'm actually feeling. Because anytime you're at 8 to 10, it's becoming toxic to you. It's becoming overwhelming. So that's what this window of tolerance is. This is like, if you get below that, if you have no stress in your life, you can actually become kind of depressed and, kind of sad because there's just not really anything going on. You can be in hypoarousal, but hyperarousal, that's when you cannot calm down. You have too much going on. You've got to bring yourself back down within the window of tolerance. What we find is people who have been through a lot of trauma, they get overwhelmed quicker. Their window of tolerance is smaller. And that's why some people can handle a lot more stress than other people can, because everyone's kind of been through different experience, different journey in life. So your window of tolerance might be very, very small. And what that means is very little things will push you over the edge and you're out of your tolerance level. Your stress level goes through the roof. Part of the work of therapy is helping to widen that window, helping to grow our understanding of how we can manage our own stuff, because stress is always going to happen, right? We can't take away all the stress in our life, and we may not actually want to, but we got to figure out how to manage it in healthy ways. Okay, we're about to switch gears here in just a second. I wanted to kind of finish with this idea of the mud of life. So we're all going through stuff. There's no way around that. You have to go through the mud. But how deep is that mud? It really depends on who you ask. So like, for example, in the pandemic, everybody had to go through the pandemic. We all had a pandemic experience, COVID-19. For some of us, it was maybe not that hard for us, maybe not that difficult. I know some people even feel guilty because it was maybe a positive thing for them. For me, it allowed me to be at home more with my children. It allowed me to have more time. I was working from home and doing school from home, so I was really able to invest in my family. But for my friends down the road, they lost their grandparents. And they had to go through all kinds of disruptions. So for me, the mud was not that high. But for the other people, because of what they experienced and because of their own past, it was almost drowning, right? They were neck deep in it. So when you ask somebody how stressful something is, you might be thinking, why are you so stressed and so overwhelmed for this? The reality is you just have not lived the life that they have. So it may not be overwhelming to you, but it may be to them, and vice versa. Other people might be doing perfectly fine, but you're stuck and you're struggling. That's okay, that's normal. But when you're aware of that, then we got to figure out what to do about it. So I want to invite my friend up here, and as she gets ready to come up, I just want to introduce this concept. Trauma-informed care is like a buzzword, but really what we're talking about here is how do we help people? How do we give people hope and optimism? Because we're talking about all this trauma and all these challenges, anxiety and depression and all these other things, but how can we really see people kind of grow and do better. So there's 3 pillars here, and I'll talk about them more tomorrow. And let me get you a microphone. Can we have this yellow microphone turned on? 3 elements of what we want to try to do when we try to help people. And one is creating a safe environment. What we found is people will not heal if they don't feel safe, right? That's just a reality. So you could have someone coming to counseling all you want, but if they go home and they feel extremely unsafe at home, they're not going to be able to move past whatever they're dealing with. So we have to create safe environments for people to heal. We want to also help support and teach emotional regulation. That's what I was talking about. If you're overwhelmed and you're flipping your lid all the time, how can we help you to get back down into a place where you can manage the stress that's going on in your life? And finally, we want to build relationships and connectedness. What we're finding at the end of the day, and this is what church is really all supposed to be about, is that we need other people in order to heal. We do. We need a healthy and safe community, oftentimes more than we need therapy. Now, some people do need therapy. That's really important. But what we really need is people who are just going to be there no matter what, who are going to be loving and kind and help us in our process. So this is my friend Ansley, and I've been dragging her over the state lately because she has a powerful story of someone who has been there, who's been sort of into that dark place, that place of being overwhelmed. And God has been able to enable her to get through it. Amen? Can someone say amen? And her story, I hope, will give you some optimism, some hope if you're in a dark place, but also for your friends and your family who might be going through things. And so I'm going to turn the time over to her, and then I'll come back up here and we'll just have a short conversation after.
Hi. Wow. You were right. You don't have to put it so close to your mouth. Hi. Like Pastor Mello said, I'm Ansley Acevedo. I'm a senior at Atlanta Adventist Academy. My favorite color is red. My favorite animals are red pandas. I think that's a pretty solid introduction. Before I start, I really want to thank Pastor Mello for this opportunity. This is my 4th time speaking, or 3rd time speaking at his trauma series. And the passion that this guy has for talking about trauma and mental health in the church is truly inspiring. He's been a tremendous help in this journey and of sharing my story to people and mentoring and guiding me through it all. So I really want to thank Pastor Mello for that. I guess to start, I want to kind of talk about each and every one of us have our own testimony, our own story, a memoir per se, that is still being written in each and every one of our lives, each day. And there was a point in time at which I was ashamed of my story. Many people in their lives in which they try their absolute best to hide in the world. This part of me was something that I try to hide from everyone. I had no expectations of sharing this until I met a certain redhead, Pastor Mello. And it's taken a lot to get to this point. It's still hard to talk about. It's very vulnerable for me, and I don't doubt I'll choke up at one point or that I'll scramble my words, but I just ask you to bear with me, and I ask God to open your hearts to, bear with me and have that patience and open your hearts and pray that God gives you the wisdom throughout this series to learn something let him learn something through you. Yeah. Okay. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, with 2 wonderful parents. My mom and dad immigrated here from Mexico. They left their entire life and family and all that they had known for my 2 brothers and I. My parents gave me a wonderful childhood growing up. I had a multitude of toys in my room, a warm bed to sleep in, food in my stomach. My parents are Adventist, and they raised me in an Adventist household. I went to church every Sabbath, went to Sabbath school, sang at church, joined Adventures, and then Pathfinders. I went to public school for my elementary school life, but ultimately for middle school, my parents decided to enroll me into an Adventist school. I graduated from middle school, and I was enrolled to Atlanta Adventist Academy. Up to this point, I kind of left a few details out. But ever since I was a kid, I was deemed an overachiever, a perfectionist. I always strive for that validation, to be the best, to be the example, to be the type of person that you would look at and be like, I want to be like them. As a kid, I would beat myself up if I didn't color in the lines perfectly, or I would keep telling myself to say yes to people even though I didn't want to. And anxiety grew on me to always please others, and it grew the older I got. I came into my freshman year, guns blazing. Everyone around me told me that high school was so important, especially since it's the first year, and that those 4 years will reflect on how you'll do in your future. If you fail, you'll end up flipping burgers across the street. I didn't want to fail. I didn't want to get just a passing grade. I didn't want to be mediocre. The anxiety of being a person that people would be proud of grew even more. With this mindset of always trying for number one, of always trying my absolute best, the end of my freshman year, I was an honor student. I was class president. I was a student tutor, a student leader. My teachers and peers praised me, told me how proud they were of me and impressed they were. I was proud of myself too, so happy with myself. I was a person that people were proud of. I went into my sophomore year thinking that it would be the same. Just get good grades and withhold your positions and be a good example. I thought that would be enough because it was to me last year. My second semester of sophomore year, school had become an overwhelming obsession to me. I had tied my self-worth to my grades, to my performance at school. All of a sudden, nothing I did was ever enough for me. This anxiety I carried spiraled into a little voice in my head telling me to try harder, to be better, and to be on top. It had stopped at just being a person people would be proud of. It had become to be a person that the voice in my head would be proud of. If I got in anything below an A, I would deem myself as worthless and not suitable for anybody around me. To ensure I didn't get anything below an A, I started to isolate myself from everything and everyone. All my focus would be on school or studying. I never left my room. I skipped social events with friends, stopped participating in church, stopped enjoying my hobbies. But that was only the start. I started prioritizing school over everything else. I started unhealthy habits. I neglected myself and my well-being. I stopped sleeping a healthy amount. Weekdays, I would pull all-nighters for studying or tests. And then the weekends, I would just sleep because that's how I could escape, by just sleeping. I had stopped eating because I felt like it was a waste of time, because in the time I could be eating or going out with friends or being a teenager, I felt like it was more important to be doing homework or studying or just doing anything that would get me that grade. I wasn't okay. I knew it. I didn't want to accept the fact that my life was a mess. Because from the outside, I didn't look like a mess. I was antsy. I was class president, essay leader, debate co-founder, a straight 8 student, and I built this persona of always being fine, of having everything together. I told myself everything I was doing was okay, and I started to believe it. I made myself believe I was fine because I was too scared to deal with the fact that I wasn't. I felt as my feelings weren't good enough to be addressed. I felt as if I needed to keep up this bubbly personality at the time to make it seem that I was okay. To make the people around me not worry, just not to be another burden. I was born in an immigrant household where mental health was never talked about. My parents loved me, and I know they'll always support me through anything, but it was hard for them too. They didn't know how to talk about mental health because it wasn't even a topic discussed when they were my age. They didn't know how. At church, it was talked as if you struggle with your mental health, that was the repercussion of having a poor relationship with God. If it was ever brought up, the only response you would be told is to just pray it away. I felt as if I couldn't talk to anybody about what I was feeling. I felt alone. I didn't feel like me. I felt stuck in a cycle of being overworked and always being tired. I was tired of being tired. I got to a breaking point. I was trapped in my mind. A prisoner to my depression, I wanted to get out. I wanted it to stop. A friend had found out what I was going through and let the right people know. And just like that, the whole persona of me being okay fell down. I was angry. I was furious that everything I had built was destroyed. I didn't want help. I didn't want to accept that I wasn't okay. Guilt, shame, anger washed over me, but for the first time, I felt a sense of relief. And this enormous amount of pressure on my back was gone. The voice in my head always made sure that I made it seem like everything was okay. But for the first time, I could breathe. I didn't have to act. Responsible adult was told about my situation, and I had a long talk with them about what the next step was. For the first time, I realized I was a mess. For the first time, I realized how broken I was. I came to my parents, and I told them everything. And the first thing they did to me was hug me. They told me that they loved me and that it was going to be okay, and they were right. Within that first week, I started therapy. I didn't want to. The last thing I wanted to do was to talk to a stranger about my feelings. I had to hide them for so long that it was hard to open up. Throughout the first few months, God really sustained me. He gave me the strength to push through the ups and downs. He was always there. And I've been in therapy for about a year and a half now, and I give that all thanks to God. And you might ask, what's the point of me telling you this? What's the point of Pastor Mello doing this mental health series? I told Mello my story last August, and he felt as if it was something that people needed to hear. He asked if I could share my testimony at my school spiritual retreat, and at first I was hesitant. There was a part of me that didn't want to. It was so vulnerable that I didn't want people's opinions of me to change, yet something told me to. I shared my story with my school. It made an impact. Kids came up to me and told me that they related to my story. And then one of my friends came up to me. Her name was Valeria. She hugged me, and she told me how much she loved me and how proud she was of me.
Ansley has offered to share her story multiple times now because we know that this is real life, right? That this is not hypothetical. And that we want to do whatever it takes to help people. We want to do whatever it takes to ensure that people can have hope. One thing that is important, I think, about Ansley's story is that she came from a loving home, okay? We talked about trauma these last 2 days. She came from a place where people did love and care for her, from a good community, and still struggled. You're not weak if you struggle. Do you hear me? It's not that there's something wrong with you. It's a part of the human existence. But we want to give people hope. We want to give people a chance to see that there are ways out of the struggle. Thank you, Ansley, for sharing. Can we give her a round of applause for her courage? Do you want to answer questions? Every single one of us has a story. Some are more dramatic than others, perhaps. Some of you might be sitting here, maybe like Ansley has shared in the past or during this time, where we can compare our struggles to someone else and feel like we don't have a right to feel bad or that we're not going through what someone else is going through. And so why are we struggling so much? But I want to tell you that no matter what you're dealing with, your struggle is valid. And the very best thing that you can do is talk to somebody. is share your experience with somebody who you trust, who you know has your best interest in mind. One of the most challenging things we do, and what we often do when we're in the midst of our depression and our anxiety, is we cut people out. We stop talking about what we're going through. We stop answering the phone or the texts or whatever. Or if we do, we act like things are okay when we know internally there's something going on. I don't want anyone here to get to a crisis point, to a breaking point. I want you to remember that you have a community. You have people who love you and people who care for you. And that there is a light at the end of every tunnel, and sometimes it's a long tunnel. And sometimes it doesn't feel like it. But I promise you, God has a plan for your life. God knows what you are carrying. And He knows how to help you through this process. I know there are times when we're there, we can't seem to hear or see what God is doing. But I promise you, He is there in the darkest moments of your life. If that's not your story, again, I know there are people here who maybe have never struggled in these ways. Thank you for being here anyway. I want to challenge you to be that friend, to be the person who's willing to do whatever it takes to try to help other people. To remember that you can't save anybody, right? That's not your job. But you can be a good friend. You can be the person when someone thinks about, I've got to talk to somebody, they think of you. They think of your face. And if they do reach out to you and you don't know what to do, find somebody who has a little bit of training. I'm happy to be a resource for people. I'm happy to be somebody who you can call and say, hey, someone shared something and I don't know what to do. I don't want to be the only one. I hope you have somebody local who also has training, but I'm happy to be that person. I don't want to go away from tonight without encouraging you. If you are at a place where you are having these thoughts that are maybe a little out of your control, where you're not sure if you want to continue, you want to keep going, or you don't know what to do with what's going on internally, do not leave this place without talking with somebody. And I'm willing to be that person, but I can't talk to everybody, of course. But I know we got another pastor back here who you can speak with. I know you have probably some other people in your audience who you may be able to trust and you feel a little bit more comfortable with. But don't go out of here without sharing, even if it's just to say, I'm really struggling. And if someone shares that with you, thank them for trusting you and encourage them. Go with them. Do whatever it takes to have them to talk to somebody who has training, who knows what to do. Tomorrow we're going to turn a corner. We're going to start talking about what can we do? How can we really help people? Or if I'm going through stuff, what are some things that might help my mental health? The next day we're going to talk specifically, how do we help people who are in the depths of despair, who are depressed and overwhelmed, or maybe considering taking their own life. It's a heavy conversation, but there's a lot of things that we can do. And I want us to have these conversations. I know they're heavy, and I know they're hard. But part of the process is being able to talk about these things. And when we can't talk about it, that's when people feel like they can't share anything that's going on in their lives. Part of Ansley's story that she shared that I really appreciate is that she came from a family, she grew up in a place where mental health was not something that was talked about very much. And what I appreciate about her family is that when she did share that she was struggling, what did she say the first thing they did was? They gave her a hug. And that changed everything, I truly believe, because that gave her courage and bravery. Can you imagine coming up here and sharing some of your deepest struggles with strangers? That's a powerful thing she's willing to do. And it's partly because her family was willing to hear her. Didn't minimize when she said she was struggling. Didn't try to make her feel like she shouldn't be struggling, but walked alongside her and was willing to do whatever it takes to help her. pray that you are part of a family, a friend group, a community, a church that is the same way. As we get ready to close, I'm going to have a prayer for us. And I want to invite you, if you're willing to be that person, say, I want to be a safe person. I want to be somebody that can do whatever it takes to help my friends. I invite you to stand for this prayer. And that's just you signifying, I don't have it all together. I don't know what to do. But I want to be a part of the healing process. I want to be a part of the solution. We're living in a really messed up world. And it can get overwhelming for anybody. And people can get tired. But if we have a community of people who are committed to really seeing people thrive, we can save people's lives. And that's really what this is all about at the end of the day. We want to save people's lives. Let's pray. Dear Father, thank you so much for what you are doing in this place. This is a hard thing. This life is a hard thing. And nobody gets through it without having some scars and some bruises. Dear Lord, I'm wanting to lift up the people in this audience right now and those online who are wounded right now. And maybe other people don't even realize it. Maybe they don't even want to admit it themselves. But they're hurting. Lord, we don't have all the answers. We need you. We need your healing. We need your love to come and surround people. Help them to know that you are present with them in this place. And Lord, I pray that you'll be with each person here. We need you. We need you to be a part of the healing process. May this church and may these families and may these people be people that can help to transform lives. But at the end of the day, Lord, there's nothing that we can do without you. So we invite you to be a part of our healing. Please bless us and help us to be a blessing. In Jesus' name, amen. Tomorrow night, I invite you to be back. We'll talk about resilience, basically how to help people to get past some of the struggles and to manage the stress that there is in their life. Thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate it.
All right, you may be. Can you hear me okay? All right. How many of us are thankful for the topics that we're having? They're truly very helpful, are they not? Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you so much for sharing as well of your experience and testimonies. If anybody would like to have any additional prayers, we will be having to my left, your right. Sister Juliet will be here in this corner. If you would like to pray as a group or individual, however, that will be done there. Also, I will be here on this side. Some have already seen me. If you would like to schedule a time where you can speak to, have a conversation with our speaker, I will be taking down availability and information so that can be situated. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I do believe there is some more pizza back there. Feel free to grab some. And we hope to see you back here tomorrow at 6:30. Thanks again and many blessings.